All right. Hello and welcome everyone to this um, Skills Kickstart, our featured skill session on inventory management best practices. We've got Mike Ivacek here to present for us today. I'm going to go ahead and give the other attendees just another minute to get logged in. While we're getting everybody settled here, just keep in mind the chat feature and Q&A down there at the bottom of the screen as you're getting logged in. Please feel free to drop any questions in chat or Q&A. We'll be monitoring them throughout the session. We may ask you to raise your hand if you have any questions or something like that we can address live. But like I said, I'm just going to give the other attendees another minute to arrive before we get started. All right. It looks like we have a quorum on attendees here, so I think we are going to go ahead and get started. For those of you who just joined us, please drop any questions that you have in the chat or Q&A feature. We'll be monitoring them throughout the session. Mike, off to you.
Sounds good. Yeah, hello. Welcome to the Orchestrated Inventory Management webinar. My name is Mike, and I've been a senior implementation consultant for Encompass/Orchestra for a little over 5 years now. Just like what Lori said in the beginning of this, if you have any questions that you want to put into Q&A as we're going through the presentation, feel free to do so. We might get to them in the moment, or there's a demo portion of this presentation as well, so we might get to it at that point as well. With that out of the way, let's look at the agenda for today's presentation. So in the beginning, we're going to go through inventory concepts. This might be a high-level overview for a lot of you guys. We're going to go over item master data, batch management, warehouses, etc. It'll just be going over the high-level concepts of those. After that, we'll be going over automated versus manual inventory postings. After that, we'll go into inventory transfers and the ins and outs of that. After that, the best practices in inventory counting and posting. And then we'll dive into a little bit of the inventory reports available, as well as some like tips and tricks for those. And then, like I said, I'll go into a demo where I'll go over some specific scenarios or like things you might not have known, little tips and tricks in there. And then we also use that opportunity to do a little deep dive into any questions that you guys might have had during the presentation. So let's jump into those inventory concepts. So you're already familiar with the way that items are set up and coded in the system, hopefully. You have your item master data records for all of your raw materials, packaging materials, WIP products, finished goods, merchandise maybe. All of these things are tracking your inventory, tracking the ins and outs. You might even have some non-inventory items that you like to use on your purchasing documents, or maybe you putting non-inventory items in your production, like a labor or overhead item as well, that you're not necessarily tracking inventory, but you're wanting to track maybe a cost associated with a line item. In my demo, we'll go over and take a look at a tool that allow us to monitor, like troubleshoot, edit, all of that item master data in bulk. So you're not having to go through like these individual screens that I'm showing on the presentation here. There's tools to help you kind of troubleshoot and work with your item master data if that's what you're in charge of. Batch tracking, super important, especially in our line of work here with like tracking your raw materials, your production, and who you're selling to what customer distributor. So it's a huge part of inventory management, and you've hopefully already been doing it through purchasing, through planning that production, through expressing those production orders, and through shipping goods. And as well, for any of our spirits customers on the call, this is also super important for your spirits reporting, because the batch details is where the proof is tracked, which helps calculate for our spirits reports for proof gallons. So it's going to, whatever you have as a proof on your batch details times the quantity of, we call it wine gallons for spirits, it calculates that for your proof gallons for specific spirits proof gallon reporting. Moving on to warehouses. So you're aware that the way warehouses exist in Orchestrated, it's anything that those items and item master data can be put into. So when we say warehouses, this can also mean your vessels, your tanks. Anything that you want to put an inventory item in is considered a warehouse in the system. And again, I know this is high-level overview, but I like to just bring this stuff up just in case there's any new users out there and you're wondering, oh, why is my fermenter called a warehouse? Well, it's because in the database, it's just something that houses an item. In our demo, I'm hopefully not going to teach you guys a new trick. Hopefully you guys already know some of these tips and tricks, but I'm happy to teach like some cool tips and tricks. There's a tool out there if you add like a new fermenter for per se, an easy tool to add items to that, which we'll go over. All right, so I mentioned automated inventory postings. So these have been happening and going about as you've been doing your jobs within Orchestrated this whole time. So when you enter a document such as a goods receipt PO, production orders, AR invoices, etc., there are created automatic inventory transactions in the database. And you can see here in our screenshot, for example, when you execute a production order, there are automated things that happen in the background. There's, at least with a production order, there's a receipt from production and an issue from production. And these happen when you click that express button, when you process these, you receipt something in and issue something out based on your components and your product. Same thing happens when you are bringing stuff in on a purchasing document, either that be a goods receipt PO or like an AP invoice, and then moving stuff out via like a delivery or an AR invoice. These things happen automatically. With that, there might be instances where you might need to do a manual inventory transaction that's not automated. So that brings us to our next slide. Manual inventory posting. So we've already talked about some of the use cases for these. It could have been through returning keg shells or maybe issuing out loss in tanks or something like that. Other common receipts uses for goods receipts and goods issues is for correcting batch info as well. If you receive incorrect batches into the system, a way to fix that could be to issue out the goods and receive them back in with different batch number. All sorts of reasons can require manual inventory transactions. So again, some of the most common ones are listed on this. So issuing out loss in tanks, if you have a little bit left over that you didn't execute in your production, you can issue those out just with that. You can correct those batches like I mentioned earlier. You might get rounding errors in your production based on ratios or decimal places, and you can use that to make sure that the numbers are matching reality. And like I mentioned before too, bringing back keg shells is probably one of the more common ones as well, because they're a zero cost item, and when you issue them out in production, you need to bring them back once they're returned, and that's usually through a goods receipt. Talking about goods receipt, we're just going to do a high-level overview of what we're looking at when we're looking at a document like this. So I like to kind of start with the top to bottom, left to right. So when you're looking at this goods receipt, we have the posting date up on the top right. So when was this inventory received? And the item details. What are we receiving in? And for how much? What warehouse are we bringing it into? Another helpful tip too, if you don't see any of these things like are on my screenshot, friendly reminders to get into your form settings and make sure, like, I don't know if by default some of you are seeing like warehouse or maybe item description. These are things that through form settings can really benefit your ease of use in the system as you set them. And as a friendly reminder, if you do update your form settings, make sure you're going to file exit when you leave the system. Don't click the X button on the upper right, or don't leave your computer and wait for it to time out, because those form settings will disappear and you'll have to redo them when you log in again. So make sure if one, change your form settings so it makes your life easier. Two, make sure you exit correctly so that it saves. Also with the goods receipt, make sure that your GL account and your price and totals are all looking correctly. And for variance reasons for your TTB, be that the BRO or the DRO. If you're receiving something in this case, you might need a variance reason so it reports correctly either on the brewer's report of operations or the distiller's report of operations. So make sure you're checking that box if it's an item that's applicable to those reports. Very similar, but instead of coming in, we're going out is the goods issue. It almost looks identical. Actually, it pretty much does, except for the word issue rather than receipt. So just make sure you're checking the dates. Dates probably one thing that if you don't want to be entering these in too fast because an accountant might get mad at you if you post in the wrong month, for example. So just make sure that you're posting in the right date. And again, that variance reason is very important. I get a lot of support tickets that I need help with because they issued out an item that was applicable and now their BRO report or DRO report has a discrepancy on the bottom of the page, like saying that the top doesn't match the bottom. And usually it's because a variance reason wasn't used or maybe a wrong variance reason was used. We do have support articles on this if you are interested. If you look at our support articles and type in BRO or DRO, you'll find like a line explanation, which also brings in the variance reasons and the use cases for them as well. So if you're unsure, check out those support articles. Next, we have inventory transfers. So inventory transfers don't bring inventory in and out per se, but rather from one warehouse/tank to another. And depending on your GL determination setup, this might create an inventory transaction that changes GL accounts. If like you are switching from one location to another and you need those to hit different GL segments and you have that set up, that might create a different transaction. But inventory transfers or warehouse transfers are typically just going in one warehouse and coming out the other. So transferring between facilities, moving, let's say a green beer from one tank to another for dry hopping or something like that, or just moving from one tank to another, or sending. One of the most common ones for inventory transfers that I see is sending your finished goods to your tap room or like your finished goods spirits to your tasting room as well. One of the most common use cases for those inventory transfers. And just looking at this as well, little high level overview of what we're looking at. Always check those dates on the top right, making sure that you're transferring matches reality. In the top part as well, little tips here and there. If everything's going from one warehouse into another, there is the from and to warehouse on the top section. So if everything is going from, in this screenshot, A3T to TR01 on your items list, you can set that there and that'll change every single line item in the table below. If that's not the case, you can adjust the from and to warehouse in the actual table below, which is where the items that you're sending to different warehouses, checking that quantity. And again, if for whatever reason you're moving something maybe to another warehouse that's for like being destroyed or something like that, I'm trying to think of a use case scenario for transferring that would be applicable for the TTB, but always check that variance reason. And if you're questioning it, go to that support article or put in a support ticket and we should be able to get an answer to you quickly enough. All right, moving into inventory counting. So inventory counting, why count? Periodic inventory counting is crucial to ensure that the inventory in real life matches the inventory in your database. As a best practice, we want you to perform inventory counts at least once a month just to make sure that your inventory in virtually is matching your inventory in real life. I've seen people do it more often than that, but as a best practice, we at least say try and do it a monthly inventory count so you're reflecting reality with your inventory counts. And as kind of like a rule of thumb when executing inventory counting, if you find large variances while performing the count, this should not be ideally fixed using an inventory counting and posting. If you're finding large variances, it usually means there's some other problem happening in the system, probably along the lines of like maybe someone didn't enter in a purchasing document, maybe someone didn't execute production correctly. It's a kind of a red flag. If you're finding large variances, the inventory counting and posting should not be a band-aid that you put over that and just correct things. It should be an opportunity to say, hey, are we missing documents in the system? Is something not happening correctly in real life being reflected in the database? So just as a rule of thumb, if you are seeing those large variances, pause and take a look, do some troubleshooting to try and figure out how your system is not operating as best as it can. What the inventory counting and posting is ideal for is the small variances. Maybe, like I said, there's rounding errors that occurred. Maybe something wasn't consumed as accurate as it could be, like maybe a couple pounds of hops or malt difference in production or something like that. Or maybe with your packaging items, maybe you recorded a little more or less than what actually happened in reality. Or maybe something got destroyed. That's where these inventory countings and postings are kind of what they're ideal for, is making sure that whatever at the end of the month your inventory looks like matches that reality sitting in your warehouse. So we have a process of inventory counting and posting that is pretty seamless and pretty easy to use. So this is typically how we recommend executing inventory and counting and posting in OBeer / OSpirits. Unless you have the mobile apps, it might be a different process than if you're currently using those. But I'll kind of explain the process that we generally encourage people to do. So within your databases, there should be a query, and you can find your queries if you go to Tools, Queries, Query Management, I believe. And you can see in my screenshot, there's the query manager. From there, if you type in inventory or inventory count sheet, you should find a query that looks like that in that screenshot. And then you can see if you run that query, there's the next screenshot that's kind of covered by my inventory counting. What it does is it gives you a result of every item in your database and the current in-stock quantity, batch information, and what warehouse it's in. From there, you can take that query and copy it. Copy that table from the query, copy that to an Excel document outside of your, like on your other desktop per se. From there, what you want to do is add a column on that Excel document saying counted quantity or something like that. Something that you're going to fill out for what is the actual. And then you're also going to want to maybe, because this is going to show everything in every single warehouse. A lot of customers that do this process, this best practice process, will filter by warehouse. So you're not just, maybe you have multiple locations. I only want to do A1 or my main warehouse. Filter by warehouse. From there, you can download that or send that to someone on the floor. Maybe they have a tablet or anything that can house an Excel document, and they can walk the floor and enter in and do their inventory count using any type of device, like I mentioned, that does Excel functionality. So they'll go on the floor and do the count. So once the file is filled out and returned, you're ready to import that into Orchestra. After you open an inventory counting document, you can make sure the dates, always check those dates. And best practices when you're doing these inventory counting and postings, try and do them ideally when people are not going to be doing ins and outs of inventory in the system. You want kind of like a system downtime when you're doing these. Otherwise, you might run into errors saying, like, if you do try and deplete something with this inventory posting document later down the road, it might say that something might fall into negative inventory. So ideally, best practices, you want to execute this like on an end of day or some kind of system, when someone's not going to be either bringing stuff in or taking stuff out of inventory in the system. But once you get that file returned, you can kind of see in the screenshot here under the inventory counting document, you click add items and then import items. And then there's going to be another screen that pops up that says you're going to map the columns to what the file is you have. And then you're going to select that file that you have on your computer, and you're going to say add the inventory counting document. Once you've done that, you're reviewing that inventory counting document. Everything that's been filled out should be all set there for you, but just review it. Again, check your dates, just kind of review and make sure When you do that import, you'll also see you might have a threshold, and some items might show up in red if their threshold is too high. Review what the inventory count does, but when you're ready, all you have to do is in the lower right, there's copy to inventory posting. You'll click that. That'll open up an inventory posting document. And if you reviewed your inventory count document, you just have to click post. And then anything that maybe was decremented inventory, or maybe you had to increase inventory as well, will be posted. It's a pretty easy and streamlined process. You guys might be doing it, you might not. If you aren't and you have questions after this as well, put in a support ticket. We can help you kind of learn or understand this process. It can be super simple compared to what you might be doing now. All right, so now we're going to jump into a few useful reports in the system that I see people use commonly or frequently. We can maybe go into examples during the demo of those as well. One of those being, so there's inventory not counted since report. So this is excellent report for helping planning inventory counts. And what it does is it shows the current on-hand quantities and the date of the last inventory counting document that had these items populated on it. And this report also allows you to sort by warehouse or items. This kind of helps you troubleshoot, hey, have we been doing good about our inventory counts recently? Or maybe is there some items or warehouses that were not doing so good on our inventory counts? So this kind of keeps you honest in the system. It's a pretty easy report to run to make sure that things are operating as the best practice, like I mentioned earlier, like maybe twice a month or maybe once a month. It's a good way to see if anything's being excluded and not being tracked as much. Another helpful report is our quick raw inventory planning sheet. So you can see here the base area of this is inventory reports, orchestrated reports, and then you should find the name of this report. This is typically used by purchasing staff. They use it to view supply and demand requirements per item and allows them to quickly see when an item will run low or not enough in the system. So you can see in the screenshot the quantity to order, and you need to order by date before it goes in the negative. The key requirements to have this report work the way you want it to. You need to have accurate dates for your sales, purchasing, and production documents. And that does include, like on your purchase orders or sales documents, on your sales order documents, there's the planned ship date or planned delivery date. That does impact reports like this. So you need to have kind of accurate when you think things are going to either leave stock or come into stock for this report to be optimal. But it's a really quick running report to see, hey, right now, based on the documents I have in, what am I going to run out of? What do I need to order? And when do I need to order it by? And another tip for this too, there's a little toggle button that says items with shortages only. And this greatly reduces the amount of items that get populated. So if you're looking for just what am I going to run out of in the near future, you can check that first item box there, and it'll give you kind of a more streamlined report. Next, we have the available to promise report. There are two of these in the system. There's an orchestrated one that's going to be a crystal report layout that shows in the screenshot here. There's also what we call an SAP or system report that is available to promise as well. They show pretty much the same data. It's just if you like it in maybe if you want to copy it to Excel, you might want the SAP version or the system version rather than this crystal report version. The crystal reports look nicer if you're trying to print it out. But some people don't like that because it's not as easily exported to Excel. So this report's typically used by sales staff as it shows uncommitted inventory available for immediate delivery. Production planners may also use it to view what items might need priority in production as well. So like the name says, available to promise, it's going to give you an on-hand, a committed, an on-ordered, and then your available to promise. And again, this is based on the documents that you have in the system. If you're using something like the MRP functionality in the system, the previous report, the quick raw inventory planning sheet, and the available to promise, these things are probably not used as much because you're utilizing the MRP recommendations or reports within MRP. But if you're not using that, these are some kind of MRP-like reports, we like to say, to kind of give you that committed and on hand and when you need to order these things. Speaking of MRP, the next report that I find a lot of people find useful is the Future Inventory Status Analysis, or if that sounds like a mouthful to you, the FISA report, we like to call it. We also like to call this the mini MRP report. Again, this is typically used by sales staff to view an uncommitted inventory available for delivery. Again, production might use this to see when things need to be put into stock for rescheduling and production purposes. The as of date needs to be either today's date or in the future, hence the first word of this report, future. You can't really run this in the past. It'll be by default run it for today. And what this does is it'll look of whatever you do the as of date. I think it's 2 to 3 weeks out, but it gives you an in-depth day-by-day supply and demand based on the documents you have in the system. So sales orders, production orders, purchase orders, whatever you're trying to run this report on, it'll give you a day-by-day for up to 3 weeks of you're available to promise and highlight things in red that will maybe fall into negative of your available to promise. Questions I get on this, because it's kind of like a mini MRP, that 3 weeks, sometimes people run into like, oh, is there a way to extend that? And answer is no, not for this report, unless you want to customize it somehow. But if you do the as of date as today, for example, you run it for however many days it goes out for, you can just back out and then run the as of date as whatever where it ended as well. It's not like can't get a quick answer for that, but it is a roundabout way of like if you wanted to go 6 weeks out, for example, that's how you would do it using this report. And unlike the other reports, like the available to promise, it does give that day by day view, which I think a lot of people like. All right. Another tool or another report that I really like and I like to show people that might not know about it is the inventory analysis tool. So it's an Excel-based tool that we've developed that, as you can see, it reports with 7 different reporting options in it. So it's kind of if you ever see like analysis tool in the database, it usually means one, it's going to be an Excel document that opens outside of your database somewhere. So, a rule of thumb with these like types of things, in our demo, we're gonna look at other Excel things such as our tools or utilities. Quick note on this: if you're noticing it doesn't pop up right away, don't be hasty and start clicking at it again or clicking it multiple times. It just takes a second for that Excel tool to pop up, and if you click it multiple times, you're really gonna regret doing that because they're just going to be as many times as you clicked it is going to be as many times Excel documents pop up. It can sometimes cause things to crash depending on how many times you clicked it. So don't be hasty when you're clicking something like the inventory analysis tool or some of the utilities that we're going to get into a little bit later in the demo. And then just another quick tip before I get into this as well, what the inventory analysis tool is. When you're exiting out of any of these Excel-based tools, the general rule of thumb is it says, just like any Excel document, it's like, do you want to save or don't save? You always want to don't save on these Excel tools. And the reason why, one, the saving doesn't send things back to Orchestrated. There's a button on all the tools that sends things back to your database. And the reason why you don't want to save is you always want the Excel document to populate empty or blank. So it allows you to know, oh, I have to click the refresh button in order for my newest data to populate on this thing. Whereas I see people run into kind of some user error where someone hit saved instead of don't save. So the data will look like it popped up, but it might be like a week or 2 months old data. And you're like, oh, why hasn't this changed? And you start making edits and you'll realize this is old data. then I didn't hit the refresh button. So it causes user error. So rule of thumb, always click don't save when you exit out of these Excel tools. Like you can see though in the screenshot, there's a bunch of tabs with different reports. There's the current on hand, value by warehouse, transactions by day, transactions by type, counting adjustments, item cost chart, and an inventory value chart. I would say some of the most ones that maybe I use or other or you guys might use is it's really good for troubleshooting transactions. So when I get asked like, hey, I am wondering like what happened on like my report's not looking correctly. Can you help me figure out what's going on? I use this like on the transactions by day and by type to troubleshoot things like, oh, maybe this inventory transfer was put in with a variance reason or something like that that shouldn't have been a variance reason. It's a really good troubleshooting tool, which also gives you a good insight into that current on hand and value by warehouse as well. It gives you some really cool information. It's a very robust tool that you can utilize. And we'll take a little bit of a look into this in the demo as well when we jump into that. All right. And then some of the most robust ones, especially like I mentioned for troubleshooting or taking a look at the ins and outs of items, we have the inventory posting list and the inventory audit report. So the inventory audit report, this report is a little bit more robust than the inventory posting list. It has a lot of information on it. This report in the system that is meant to tie to your financials more. So the inventory audit report will give you information more on the financial sides of the ins and outs of your items. It'll show inventory revaluations and stuff like that. Whereas the inventory posting report is meant to track your inventory movement, i.e. the ins and outs. You can also use different valuations to make what if reports. This is more referential and shouldn't be used to reconcile against inventory financial value, where that inventory audit report, like I mentioned earlier, is more of going to be that troubleshooting your financial value of your items, whereas that posting list is going to show like, oh, this item came in on this document or went out on this document kind of thing. In conclusion to these two reports, if you want to track your inventory, both will work, but that inventory audit report should be the one if you're needing to figure out maybe why the value of your finished goods is inflated or deflated, for example. All right, we're going to jump into a demo. So give me a moment to switch over to my demo database, and then I'll go over a certain amount of things that I have on my little checklist. And then at the end of the demo, what I'll do is I'll open it up to Q&A or anything that you guys might have questions about that I covered today on inventory management. After the Q&A section, feel free to hang around if there's any other questions that come in. But after that, feel free to leave the presentation, because that is all I have for that after today. All right, so 1 second, please, while I get to the demo database. All right, so the first thing I want to cover on the demo, so we mentioned in the high level overview, we mentioned item master data. So I just want to cover a few of the things that I get questions about or things like that. So on item master data, I sometimes get questions about the check marks here. So we have check marks for inventory item, sales item, and purchasing item. So to kind of go over a little bit more into this, if you have inventory item checked, you're checking that, yes, I want to track inventory or stock in the system of this item. A use case for when this is unchecked is if I have a non-inventory item, such as like an overhead or labor item that I want to put on a bill of materials, Maybe there's a utility that I like to have as a line item, or maybe I want to track freight as a line item on our purchasing or something like that. You might want to have a non-inventory item. Another use case for non-inventory item as well is if you want to include water as an ingredient on your bill of materials or recipes, but don't want to track inventory for it. You just want to literally have that as a line item on a bill of material. That's another use case that I've seen where you have an inventory item, but don't want to track actual physical inventory of it. If you have sales item checked, this means that it'll be applicable if you search for an item on any sales marketing document. So if I have it unchecked on a sales order, I will not be able to find this item. And then likewise, purchase item, because this is a finished good and I'm not purchasing it in this database, it's unchecked, which for most cases makes sense. So this will not be searchable on a purchasing document. A few other things that I just wanted to cover on item master data. There's active or inactive. If for whatever reason you maybe wrongly created an item and you wanted to make sure that it's not used ever again, make sure you mark it as inactive. If there's any transactional history, you can't delete the item. So I can't right click remove. It's not even an option here because I have transactional data in the system. So mark it inactive. You can set dates too. If like maybe it's a seasonal item and you don't want someone to accidentally put this on a document per se or make it or anything, you can put parameters on the dates for inactive as well. And then lastly, I always like to recommend in the system, right-click things. So from here on this item, I mentioned those two reports earlier, the inventory posting list and the inventory audit report. If I just want to troubleshoot this item, I wanted to say, or take a look and see, why is my item cost here different than here for these items? I would want to, like I mentioned earlier, the audit report's good for more financial things like that. I can click that and run a specific report on this item. And what it'll do is it'll show me all the transactions that I have with that item, all the ins and outs, inventory posting documents, delivery documents, production order documents. It's going to show me all of those in there and show me the values as well. You can do the same thing with inventory posting list. I use this quite frequently when customers come in with tickets asking about things like that. So if you're doing troubleshooting on one particular item, that right click and taking a look at things from here. I could jump to the bill of materials from here as well. I can even just run available to promise, which is that system available to promise. So I can click that and I can see every document that is contributing to my committed and ordered. So I can see ordered and committed. I can drill into any document that's been contributing to those, which is kind of nice, and see what is being ordered and who's ordering this item. Like I mentioned before, later in a little bit, you don't have to go over and change all of these things just manually one by one. We have a tool for that, which I'll populate soon and show you. It's a super useful tool. Hopefully you guys already know about it, but if you don't, I consider this, if you're the one person in charge of inventory management in your system, it might blow your mind because I think it's a lot easier to kind of troubleshoot things or adjust things as you go. I mentioned earlier too about batches. So we have our batches tab. You can take a look at our batches. If you need to troubleshoot a particular batch as well, you can drill into that. This will pop up two things. It'll pop up your batch details and also your batch number transactions report. So this will show me this particular batch and then what warehouse it's ever been in. And I can see the ins and outs with the transactions report. For spirits customers, like I mentioned earlier, if you ever need to, like, let's say you forgot to enter in a proof on a spirit or like a GNS that you brought in, there is, I wonder if it's because of my database I'm in now. Normally it says proof right here instead of ABV. I might have it set to a different setting right now. But if you ever needed to change that on the batch details, so it's not 0 and reporting is 0 on a report, you can actually adjust it on your batch details screen, which is nice. So if you do, let's say you're trying to run your TTB report and something got put in as 0 proof, and you're like, oh, it's not populating. I'm trying to run the Stiller's report of operations. I need to get this in yesterday. If you need to, and you change well, in this case, it says ABV, like I said, but if you change the proof and run the report again, it retroactively changes. So it will update once you update your batch details here. I just wanted to show that on the batch details, kind of a few specific things there. All right, like I mentioned earlier, there's a tool, a utility that we have. So on your modules, if you go into utilities, I'm going to go over a couple here. So we have the item master utility. That's going to be a pretty big workhorse for you if you're in charge of kind of that inventory management or making edits and stuff like that. This is going to be a great tool to utilize. Hopefully, like I mentioned, if you're not utilizing it, it's going to make your day a whole lot better if you learn about this. And then I'm quickly going to jump into the planning management utility. This is primarily used for managing your MRP items, but there's a few fields in here that also kind of tie into item master utility that aren't on master utility, the item master utility, but might be useful for you. That might not be only specific to MRP. So I'm going to jump into 2 of these here just for a quick example. And then I'll probably jump into the item inventory analysis tool just to kind of show you what that looks like. And maybe a few tips and tricks there. So first, let's jump into the item master utility. So I've already pre-populated this, but if you populate this, and remember, only click it once, when you hop into this utility, there's the refresh data little button up here. And you can either do it for only this worksheet, which will only do item master data, or the entire workbook if you want to take a look at your warehouses, which this also helps you manage your warehouses. So I did full worksheet here. And what this did is it populated all of my inventory items I have in the database. So you can see here your item code, your item name. There's a few things on here that you can't edit that are on here, though. You can't edit an item name or an item code within here. So anything left of this orange line, you can't edit. Anything to the right, you can. And there's some pretty useful things that I'll go over some common use cases for a master utility that I've seen. One, there's this filter option on each of these columns. I can filter and see what are my inactive items, what are my active items. It allows you to kind of really jump into your data and take a look really easily. So like I mentioned, you can make items inactive. Let's say this is an old brand and I'm never going to use it again. Let's just put all these to inactive. Another really common one is if you purchase things in a different unit of measure than what you consume them in. So common example being bulk malt or something like that. You might purchase in like 100-pound like bags or barrels of it or something like that. You can change the items per purchase unit, and I see that as a common way to manage that in the system. Whereas like the inventory unit of measure is still just one. So that's one thing that I see people using quite a bit. Another common one that I see, if we scroll to the right here, and you can see there's a lot of columns here. And this is we've gotten most of the most applicable fields in item master data at your wheelhouse here. Not all of them. That's why I'm going over another utility tool that might show you some more useful ones as well. Another one, default warehouse. This is a really good one to manage if you want that default warehouse that'll populate on certain documents to change. Like, let's say I don't want this to be A1 anymore. Our main brewing warehouse is A2. You can change that here and it'll change the default warehouse for you. Another common one that I see are lead days, especially for the production people out there. If you're creating new brands, and again, I'm going to go over another helpful tip for creating new items in a little bit on this demo as well. But if you somehow missed it while you're creating new items or new brands, you can set your lead days for your WIP items here, or or change them and edit them as you need to. So you can change those green beers to, instead of saying 0 lead days, maybe you're going to 7 or 11 days in that fermenter, or maybe you're dry hopping for 2 days. You want to change the lead days to plan your production better. This is a great way to edit that. Going over just a little bit more. You might want to, if you're using weights for whatever reason, that's also, I think there's purchasing weight or there's purchase weight. There might have been sales weight earlier on the columns, but if you wanted to edit weights as well, you can do that from here. If you make any changes, so let's say, I don't know why my finished good would have a lead day, but I'm going to change this to 1. When you make a change in here, column A is going to change from an N to U. So anything with the U, when you hit process changes, is going to actually go back to orchestrated and make those updates for you. Anything with an N will not be updated. So if I hit process changes, which is what you want to do if you make any changes here, you'll get a little message saying if there are errors or not. Click OK. And then any processing results are going to be here. And hopefully you always get this beautiful green message saying process successfully. That's the item master utility. It also can be used. I don't see warehouses being used too terribly often, but this is a way to manage like locations. Warehouse type, I think, would probably be one of the most applicable here. You might not, let's say you might have made a new fermenter and I'm not seeing that on my production worksheets. You might not have the warehouse type set up correctly, which does drive whether or not you see a particular tank on one of the production worksheets or not. So that'd probably be the most common, or maybe you need to make a warehouse inactive. This would be an easy way to do that as well. All right, so that's the item master utility. Like I said, if you don't know about it, hopefully now you do. It's really good for troubleshooting. Like maybe we're not making items correctly, or we're not doing the best practice. I need to fix this ASAP. This is a really easy way to troubleshoot and take a look at your items. And then just real quick, like I mentioned, I'm going to jump into the planning management utility, and I already pre-populated with it. But in this utility, what I went is to item management, and I clicked on MRP items. And like I said, it's very applicable to your MRP. But there's a few cells here that you might want to use. So again, these are on your MRP tab on item master data. So use an MRP, minimum order quantity, all these are on your tab. Here's our lead days again that were also on item master data. But here's 2 tabs that aren't exclusive to MRP that you might want to track. So minimum stock quantity and max, that lives on the inventory data tab. Under each warehouse, you'll have a minimum stock quantity and a max stock quantity. You can update that, and that will impact certain other reports in the system, depending on what you put in this. So if you're trying to say, like, we can only have 100 of this in stock before our available to promise, like we need to buy more. This is an easy way to set those in the system. I just wanted to cover that because that wasn't on our item master utility, but these are some helpful things that I do see customers run into quite a bit. And again, if you do make any adjustments here, let's see, does it change color or anything? No, not on this particular report, but yeah, it's not going to give a U on this one, but any changes that you make, and click send to orchestrated, it'll process. And anything that you did make a change to should have a processing result. Okay, it doesn't take too long to process one thing. All right, we're just gonna let that spin. And then real quick, I just wanted to jump into the inventory analysis tool just to kind of show you. So when you populate this inventory analysis tool, There's going to be the refresh data. And like I mentioned in the presentation, you might be seeing stuff, and that's because someone had clicked exit and save. So you might be seeing some old data. If you do, just always make a point whenever you open one of these tools, there's always going to be a refresh button. So you're going to click that. I already did mine. But on each of these different reports, you're going to have these different pivot tables or splicers. So definitely feel free to check these out. This is a really, like I said, these tools are super robust. And disclaimer, that's why, depending on how much data you have, when you hit refresh data, you might need to step out, maybe go get a glass of water or get another cup of coffee, because it could take a while, because this is literally populating those 7 reports I mentioned earlier. So it could take a little bit to load this because it is very robust, like I mentioned. But you can use these splicers to really focus in on your specific data. There's posting date filters as well to help narrow down a day or a quarter, or a month or a year. Super helpful reports, in my opinion, that you guys should take a look at. All right. So I mentioned earlier, there's some tools. Let's say I made a new fermenter. Like I got a new tank or something in the system and I needed to add that. So I go and I add the new fermenter, which I'll show you how to do real quick. Type in warehouses here. I'm going to go into find mode just so I don't have to reinvent the wheel. You usually do this for most things besides business partners in the system. To help avoid user error, you want to go into find mode and find an existing one that's very close to what you're trying to make and duplicate it. The important reason is, especially on warehouses, there's a little bit of a hidden view that you're not seeing. So there's that warehouse type, tax determination. These are all things that are very important for the TTB, for example, or just certain reports or functionality in the system that you might not see without going to view user-defined fields. So I'm going to find, why is it? Oh. So on here, let's say I got a new fermenter. Got a lot of fermenters in this demo database, but I got a new one. I'm going to find the last one because that next one's going to be 34 in my system. So from here, everything's pretty much set up or similar. Maybe it's another capacity of 30 barrels or something like that. I can right click and duplicate. Change that to 34. 34. And I shouldn't have to change much else if I right click duplicate. Looks like everything. Just do a quick review, add this in. So I added a new warehouse. I now need to assign items to it. And we have the warehouse assignment wizard. And this is going to be super helpful for those if you ever are making new warehouses. So I'm going to find that warehouse I just made, F34. You can see here that there's no items by default assigned to it on this. So the right side is the warehouse that you're trying to assign things to. And now the best practice is to just look for a like warehouse that you already know has the items that you're looking for. So in this case, I'm doing 33. Normally there'd be more here, but maybe I didn't do that with this one, but I want to add these items to make sure that they're available in this tank. So I can double click here, move over, and then hit save. And what that does is it now assigned all of these items to F34. So if I go on item master data, this warehouse is applicable for these items. And then the last thing I want to show you guys, I mentioned earlier, especially with the warehouse, just real quick overview of best practices. So like, let's say anything that's like a raw material or packaging, if you are adding in, like in this case, I'm going to add a new malt. The best practice is to find cascading, what's my last item code for the malt, right click, duplicate. That way you don't have to reinvent the wheel with all of these fields in the system. I get so many tickets because people aren't doing it this way. And by default, if I just went into add mode and tried to add in a new malt, by default, your item group, which drives almost all of your financial transactions in the system, is set to like keg deposit or something like that. Totally messes up your financials if you do anything with this item. So always right click duplicate so you're not making these errors. That way things are automatically batch managed. Usually all of your malts are going to be the same unit of measure, hopefully, or be applicable to the same warehouse, or everything should be up very similar. So right click duplicate, you change the code to the next one, change it to the name of the malt, and all you have to do is hit add. And that way you're not creating all these user errors that I get tickets in for. For brand items, we have the brand creation wizard. So if you're creating a new brand, this tool is super helpful. Again, so the brand code, if I was going to make a new brand, scroll down, it looks like 43 is going to be my next brand. So 1043, brand name, new pills. And then you can do created by, but if you're unfamiliar with this wizard, I know we're running pretty short on presentation time. This is going to be your best bet for making new brands rather than like trying to manually create items. So what this wizard does, if I hit next, it's going to walk you through each step, which is super helpful. So step 2, what are my production processes? And one thing that I wanted to show you guys, if you guys are currently using it or not using it, you're like, oh, I fruit this beer, but I don't see fruit on this list. And that's because the brand creation wizard is driven by another table that we have in the system called item templates. So this is where all the information, if I'm trying to make a new brand, this is where all of that lives. So for example, actually, I'm going to go into a different one besides Wort. I'm going to go into green beer. So if I make a new brand using this and I know that it goes through green beer, you can have it so it automatically using this item template. I'm going to have all of my items that I make with the brand creation wizard default to fermenting for 11 days, for example. Or using this template, you can also say, I want this item to be available to all of these warehouses, and I want F9 to 9 to be the default warehouse. Or maybe for the item template too, for like the kegs, I want it to automatically default when I'm making a bill of materials to always include a half barrel keg shell. This is where all of that default, and it can really help you if you're making tons of new brands all the time. This can save you so much time if you set up the item templates to how you want them to be. That's where all the information lives. So that's like the last tip I wanted to give you guys in this demo for item management. If you're making new brands all the time, that's where this lives. And if I was going to make a new one for fruit, for example, I'd probably want to do like a similar. So I have, I already have green beer open. Take a look, maybe screenshot this so you know, like, okay, order, maybe I should have used dry hop. So there, that order's 3. So maybe I should make it be order 3. Just so you're not having to guess on these, you can take a look and see what the existing ones look like. But if I click create new, I can then start, even go down here, code. So code is going to be fruit, examples like that. So you can kind of use the pre-existing ones, but that's just what I wanted to show you. It can really help the brand creation process and make your lives a lot easier. And using the brand creation wizard in conjunction with setting up those item templates can just make it your job so much easier. But that's really all I have for the demo today. I'm going to open it up to our Q&A or chat. I don't know if we have any in.
We do not have any questions submitted via the chat or Q&A yet. I did send out a message to everybody, so I'm going to just sort of get prepared to wrap up and give people time to type things out and submit them if you needed. I want to start off by saying thank you so much to Mike for delivering this content for us today. We hope it was really valuable. Keep an eye on that webinars page for more of these type of sessions coming up in 2025. We are actively looking at planning some of those things out. There will be a survey posted to you at the end of this session. If you have sessions that you would like to see in 2025, please submit your feedback to us. We would love to be able to host more of these sessions on the topics that are most meaningful and valuable to you. I still don't see any questions that have come through. So, yeah, we appreciate everyone who attended this session and, look forward to a great 2025 with y'all. Here, cheers.
And if you guys do have questions after this that you may have forgotten to post, put in a support ticket and we will absolutely get back to you on any questions that you guys might have. And again, thanks everybody for attending.
Yep. And look for the recording on the webinars page in the Orchestrated Help Center. We'll be posting it there shortly, okay? Bye, everybody. Thanks again.